Ryan is a First Nations advocate and activist, and now has become a Israel advocate and activist for many years, and that's how I've gotten to know him. He does great work, and so we're going to have a conversation, just sort of talk to each other about the topic, and so let's talk about identity and why it's important to really own who you are.
Well, I think like we've had this conversation a lot, and I think it's an important conversation because at the end of the day, people don't take you seriously if they realize that you don't take yourself seriously. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to, take yourself seriously in the way that, I'm so important, but it does mean that you should try to manifest an authentic identity. So you should try to be who you really are.
Completely agree. So I think for me, manifesting an authentic identity, this thing, the tickle, right? So when I started getting more interested and more involved in Jewish culture and religion, obviously, this became an important part for me because, like you said, it's important to manifest who you are, and it plays a dual role. For one, it shows other people who I am, right? So if I'm walking down the street, it's really hard to get away from, I'm clearly a big Jew. But I think it also serves the purpose of reminding me that every morning when I get up and put it on, I'm reminding myself that I'm doing something that generations of Jewish women did before me. I'm reminding myself, actually an interesting one for me is when I'm walking down the street, I'm very cognizant of the fact that I'm representing Judaism. I'm representing my people to anybody who sees me. Yeah. So I'm very conscious of what it is that I'm doing and saying, because if you see me...
Yeah, you're representing your people.
Yeah, and I might be the only Jew that you see that day or that week or that month, who knows? And if the, obvious visible Jew is being a great person.
But that's the thing, and I think that you do a good job representing your community, and that's part of why, look, I always tell my friends that for you, you're going to be the go-to Jew for your group, for your friends, for your non-Jewish friends, right? If they have a question about any kind of Judaism, anything about Jewish culture, Jewish history, anything like that, they're going to talk to you, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Because you're that person for them.
Yeah.
And in my community, I'm the go-to Indian. If they have a question about any of that stuff, I'm the guy they ask. So it's important for us to be knowledgeable, but also to be authentic. And I'm not saying that maybe Jewish people that don't wear the what's it called?
Tickle.
The tickle. I'm not saying that the people that don't wear one aren't authentic, but what I'm saying is, insofar as we're talking about identity, as you started to become more religious, as you started to become more kind of imbued with your own culture, as you started to come back, so to speak, you try to manifest that identity as best you can. Mm-hmm. And for you, and you hit the nail on the head when you said, it's less about separating myself and more about being myself.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Because you know what? When I look at that and I see it's like, okay, cool. You're clearly somebody who's not part of the mainstream, right? Whereas if you weren't wearing that, I would have absolutely no idea.
100%. So I had this conversation with somebody that, they were like, Jews are white. And for sure, if you see me walking down the street without this on, I just look like some white Canadian, right? I pass for regular white person, completely, nobody would say two words to me. Yeah. As soon as I'm wearing this, then I become the other. Then I'm this very obvious somebody else.
Yeah.
Right? And it's very interesting how something as small as, it's a piece of fabric can change your understanding of your identity so strongly.
Yeah. See, it's interesting too, because the long time ago I wore a kippah.
I was just going to say that. I was going to say when you wore the kippah.
It was one, it was just a small piece of fabric that I wore on my head. And yet it wasn't so much my perception of myself that changed. It was everybody else's.
Yeah.
And I noticed that was kind of my first kind of clue-in moment. It was a real aha moment, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm like, wait a second. So one tiny little piece of fabric changes everything.
Yeah.
And so then I started thinking to myself in regards to my own identity, like native identity, because I can pass. I mean, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
But at the same time, even though I can pass, I don't. I purposefully don't, because I feel like that's a slap in the face to all the Native people who came before me who couldn't
100%.
pass, and who still can't, some of them.
100%.
So I think of it as my obligation to my people, that I try to teach people that, hey, you know what? We are all human beings, and that we all have an identity, and that there's nothing wrong with me being different. It doesn't mean I'm not equal. And we have to, I think that that's one of the reasons, and that's one of the things I like about you, is that you understand this too. It's not about equality. We are equal. We don't have to be the same to be equal.
No, and I think what you said about an obligation to all of the people who came before, I think for me, in my particular case, that's also this, right? That I came to Judaism as an adult, and it was because my family hid it for years. I didn't know about it. So I didn't know I was Jewish until I was an adult. And I think for me, this is also, it's an obligation for me to be as Jewish as I can, to make up for the generations that came before me that weren't, right? That couldn't be, and that hid it, and that left their home and came across an ocean and hid who they were so strongly to try to get away from it. So for me, I'm not interested in hiding who I am. I don't want to do that.
So how do you feel? Like, okay, so we live in Canada, and we, like, as much as I've spoken about the difficulties sometimes of being Native in Canada, and I'm sure you've experienced some of the difficulties in being Jewish in Canada. And yet, we do live in a country where we can do those things. Like, it's, I don't have to worry about being shot if I decide to have a vigil downtown.
Not usually.
You know, yeah.
You never know, but
for the
yeah,
most part.
Yeah.
But I mean, at the same time, how do you think that helped inform your Jewish identity for you personally? Like, you said you grew up not even realizing that you were Jewish, so all of a sudden you find out that you are Jewish. How do you feel like living in Canada has helped enable you to manifest an authentic Jewish identity? I
think, well, for one thing, I have the freedom to do it. In certain parts of the world I wouldn't, for sure. So I think definitely that's a big part of it, that I have the freedom, I have the, I don't know, nobody's pressuring me one way or the other, right? I don't have to be anything. I also, though, going to Israel, it's a lot easier, because I'm not the only one wearing this. I walk down the street and all of the women have their hair covered, right? Or like a good percentage anyway.
Large number,
so it's not something that I think about there. Here, I'm very cognizant of it. But I think it's important that I'm cognizant of it, because I think if I had started it there, it might have just become a thing that I did, and it wasn't something that's an important part of my identity. Here, it's a super important part.
Okay.
Right?
See, and I totally get that, because like I noticed too when I'm in Israel, it's so much easier for Jews to be Jewish there, because everybody's Jewish. You know, so it's not, you're not outside the mainstream, and so everything there, it's just normal. And I know that here it can be difficult. Like, as a non-Jewish person who tries to have a barbecue with my Jewish friends, it's, you know, I learned that the struggle is real. Trying to get kosher meat, not easy. You know, trying to make sure that the barbecue is properly hechshered and all that stuff. You know, I get it, but it's interesting to me because I was lucky enough to meet you after you'd already kind of Baltashua, that's the word, right? So, but I noticed that even from when I met you, I noticed that there was like this evolution, and I was like, it was really cool to watch, because I'm watching somebody in real time having a cultural resurgence. Right?
No, that's 100% that's what I would call it. That it completely was, and it was a process, and I think that's how it has to be, because if I had tried to take on everything overnight, it would be super overwhelming, because anybody who knows what it is to live as an Orthodox Jew, like, it can, I think, probably feel very overwhelming and very restrictive. I don't feel that now. I think I would feel that if I had jumped into where I am now. If I, 3 years ago, all at once. No, I think, it's definitely a continuum. And I know other Jews that are in that same, my sister, right? My sister, a couple of years ago, did nothing. Like, nothing. I don't even think would have said she was Jewish. Now, I'm watching her slowly add in pieces, right? She's lighting Shabbat candles sometimes, and she makes challah on Fridays with her daughter.
That's awesome.
And they're learning about the holidays and the culture, and when they came to visit me last time, my niece wanted to learn all about the hechshers, and so we went to the grocery store so she could identify all the different kosher things, and
that's cool.
could flip it over and tell me, oh, this one's not, and oh, this one is, and so watching all of this happen, it's really cool.
I noticed, when we talk about young people, especially identity, there's a lot of young people that are really kind of struggling, and they're struggling with the difficulty of being Jewish. Now, coming from a native person, our identity, a lot of the things that we do are not really onerous. They're not difficult. It's not, we don't have very strict dietary laws, for instance.
That's true.
Shomer Shabbat. For us, there isn't one day out of the week where we're not allowed to do things. I mean, there's not a lot of things that, especially in the modern day, that we would think of as difficult.
Sure.
Right? So what would be your advice for a young person who's trying to have a cultural resurgence, who's trying to reestablish who they are, and in the way that you did? What would your advice be to them?
Well, Judaism has this really cool thing where even if you light Shabbat candles and then go to the bar and party, doesn't matter. It doesn't negate that you did that thing. You did a mitzvah. So what you did after doesn't negate the mitzvah. Okay? So even if the only thing you can do is, you're going to light Shabbat candles on Friday and then you're going to go to the bar, great. That's a part of your culture, right? I don't know, because so much of Judaism is tied, and cultural Judaism is tied to the religiousness, that it's difficult, because I don't want to seem like I'm telling people to be religious, because what I mean? That's a hard thing to do. But I think, so go to a Seder or something, right? Pick one thing and start with that.
Okay.
And find the one thing that resonates with you, and do that really, really, really well until you feel okay, now I'm able to do something else. Because for me, and there's a number of Baal Teshuvos who say the same thing, and I think any rabbi who really understands that process would say the same thing. Yeah. Find one thing, do it really, really well until it makes sense for you to add in something else, right? Until you feel like you should.
Okay, so I have a question.
Sure.
It's a little bit of a personal question.
Yes.
Okay, so for me, when I realized that I was actually going to start having a cultural resurgence, when I started realizing that I wanted to learn Cree spirituality, and instead of just kind of going along and staying Catholic, right? I had an actual aha moment. Did you have a moment like that when you were? Because I mean, like you said, you grew up in a kind of a place where you didn't even realize you were Jewish, and then all of a sudden, you must have. You said it's a process, so you must have had. From here to here, there's all this in between. So what was kind of the aha kind of thing?
I mean, I don't know that I had one aha moment at the beginning. The reason I started doing Jewish, to say, I don't know how else to say it, was because my kids were getting to an age where I had to start figuring out how to tell them about God and about, the world around them, and I wanted them to have some sort of religious identity, but I didn't identify with any of the religious identities around me. And then I went, well, wait a minute, I know my grandmother used to be Jewish, why don't I look at that and see what that's about? And then I started reading and I started learning, and it made sense. It just felt like I was coming home. And every new thing that I found, it felt like how when you come home at the end of the day and you sit down in your favorite place to sit, and you're like, oh, I'm good. This is right. Okay, I'm good. All the other stuff could be out there. That's how I felt. Every time I came to something new, it was like a relaxing, something had, some weight had been lifted. So for me, rediscovering all of these things, that's what it was. But there's been lots of moments since then where I've had personal, I don't know if I'd call them aha moments, but for example, I wear the skirts, right? Yeah. I used to religiously wear jeans. I didn't ever wear a dress. I didn't ever wear a skirt. I wore jeans. Everywhere I went, all the time, that's what I wore. And so, I don't know, maybe 6 months or 8 months ago, right after Boaz was born. I was like, I don't feel like me. I just had a baby. I feel all whatever. I'm going to put a pair of jeans on, and I'm going to like go to the store wearing jeans. I was so self-conscious. I was like, this isn't me. I'm not me. Like the black skirt is me now.
Yeah.
And I just didn't feel like myself anymore. And that was definitely a moment of like, oh, like that's become a part of my identity, and it's a stupid part. Like how you dress is dumb. Like it's a dumb way to identify yourself, but it is. It's a very clear. I'm choosing to identify, and there's no reason why the black skirt is the uniform of the From Women. It just became that, right? And so but it is my uniform. It's my daily uniform now. The same way as I can't imagine going outside with my head uncovered now. Like, and there's no, I mean, I don't think God is going to smite me if I do, but like, it's just part of who I am.
Yeah.
And this, interestingly, is very cultural. It's not so much religious, like the head covering.
Yeah.
So I've had lots of those moments where I've had these like, I don't know that they're aha moments, but they're definitely moments of like, oh, this is like in there now. There's no getting away from this. It's interesting because I don't know, or like the just automatically setting up meat and milk sinks, like not even thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I don't know, just little things like that. Checking to make sure something is kosher before I buy it. Like it's a reflex now.
It's a reflex action. That's awesome. See, I mean, like when I talk to people about this stuff, like it's interesting because I watch your people and I see you as a very clear example to my people, and it's an example of a bunch of different things. It's how to resurrect a language that is literally, become like a ceremonial language and wasn't daily use. And then you resurrected it and brought it back into daily use. Mm-hmm. I mean, I see the way, and to put it bluntly, I see the way that Jewish people struggle with doing things that are difficult, and yet they don't see them as difficult anymore. Like you just said, it's just a natural thing now. You look at something, oh, it's kosher or it's not.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of things that other Indigenous groups can learn from watching that, because I mean, the truth is, it's not difficult to be a Native person. Insofar as the obligations that we have from being Native. Whereas when I talk to Jewish people, I think that the reason that a lot of young Jewish people especially struggle with it is because these are things that are outside the norm. So suddenly you have to put your phone away, your other friends don't have to put their phone away.
But that's the point of it, is that it's outside the norm.
Yeah.
I think that's a key point here, is that being who you are and manifesting that identity. Of course, it's different than the norm. That's the whole point, right? And I think there's something to be said for striving to be outside the norm.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree.
So, like, for me, talking to like young Jewish kids, right? Like, oh, I couldn't give up bacon. Yeah, like I probably would have said that 10 years ago too. I don't even think about it. Like, it's who cares, right? Like, but I have all of these other things that I can have that are great.
Yeah. And
like it isn't a hardship. None of the things are a hardship. Like, sure, there's some times on Shabbat where I'm like this week, the baby wasn't sleeping and I was so tired, and I was like, why don't I have my manual espresso machine here? Like the one that I just push the thing and pull it down. And I'm like, I want espresso so much. I need like 12 shots of espresso and all I have is my electric one. Like, I just want coffee. So I mean, there's those moments, sure, but
yeah.
Whatever, like it is what it is, right? It's a character building thing.
Yeah, no, and I think it's interesting too, because like we've talked about that kind of stuff, and we've talked about sometimes we'll joke and say the struggle is real, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But it's interesting to me because I'm watching, and especially like I watch you, and I have other friends like the people I stay with when I'm here in Toronto, and it's interesting because they don't see it as like you were saying, they don't see this as hardship or as an obligation. This is a way of life. Like, this is how they live. And I think it's pretty cool because if you can see it that way, then you understand you're doing this for a reason.
Yeah.
Not just because you're doing it for a reason. The cultural resurgence. Hey, what's up, buddy?
I'll come back.
So I have a question, and I've been dying to ask you this, pretty much since we met.
Yeah.
So when you started doing this, did you see it going this direction? Like, did you see yourself?
No, I 100% didn't. I fell into this. This is one of those, like, Hashem wanted me to do this. I moved to Toronto because literally everything in my life was pushing me to move to Toronto. I didn't want to. I hated Toronto before I moved here. I'm from Northern Ontario. I don't like cities, and it's not my thing. But literally everything in my life, I'd be like, I can't move because of this. And then Hashem would move that away. And then I'd say, yeah, but I can't move because of this. And then that would get moved. So it got to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. Like, okay, fine, I'll move. So I got here, and I was like, what am I going to do for a job? I moved to Toronto with no job. I just came.
Yeah.
And I was like, what am I going to do? And so I happened to just go and hand in my resume at a particular advocacy place. And said, or if you need anybody, not for advocacy, I said, like, I know research, so I don't know if you need any research, but, like, that's what I do. Here you go. And I got a 6-week contract. And then I just was like, well, I'll just keep showing up and maybe they'll just keep paying me. I don't know when that contract ended. And then my boss said, well, we don't have anybody doing advocacy. Do you want to, you seem to understand the topic pretty well. Do you want to stick around and try that out? And I said, yeah, okay. And every week that passed, I was like, okay, well, this is probably going to be my last week. And then I was like, this is probably going to be my last. Okay, I mean, certainly next month I'm not going to still. Yeah. And it just became to the point where I had so much going on with it that I eventually got to the point where it was like, no, but this is what I do now. Like, you can't tell me I don't work here anymore. This is what I do. No, I had no idea that this was where I would be. Like, if you asked me 3 years ago, I would have had no interest in this. I was a Native activist. That was what I did, right? I didn't know from Israel. I had no idea. Like, I knew where Israel was. I knew, like, whatever, but I wasn't this. I advocated for people here. I advocated for First Canadians. That was my, we kind of switched.
Yeah.
But, like, that was where I came from, and that was what I believed in and what I was passionate about. So, no, I never would have said.
See, and it's so funny because one of the things that, I'm very open about it. One of the blessings, I would say, of my former employer was that I got to meet you, right? And, like, we've become pretty good friends, and I feel blessed about that. And
Sam works in mysterious ways.
Absolutely. So, I got to meet some really great people.
Yeah.
But, I mean, for me, it was interesting because I was watching you in real time having this cultural resurgence, which is something that I've been advocating, but to get to see it from another Indigenous people, right? Like, because I've seen lots of Native people come back, and
yeah, me too, and that's super interesting.
Yeah. So it was, but like to get to watch you doing it, it was like this is really cool, and the funny part was, like, it actually makes me feel stronger in my identity to know that there are other people that have gone through the same thing, where there's, maybe they were taken away from their family, or they were adopted, or for whatever reason they weren't able to manifest an authentic identity because they just didn't have it.
Yeah. And
then all of a sudden, like you said, Hashem, or the Creator, however you want to say it, He does work in mysterious ways, because all of a sudden you have these people that are coming back, and they might not, like, sometimes it's difficult because you don't have a lot of help, but one thing I really actually do respect about the Jewish community is that you do have people that do Jewish outreach. Yeah. So they will actually help teach Jews how to be Jews, how to remember who you are, how to, lighting the candles. I think that all of these things are things that we really need to make sure that people understand. Yeah. Like, and not just Jewish people. Like, I honestly believe that my people could learn just from watching that to say, hey, you know what? Maybe there are some small things that I can start with. Like, I don't have to wake up one day and,
So I come from a community, Garden River First Nation, that, like, they're really good for that. And to me, a lot of the advocacy that I do now, I'm like, what were they doing there? Right? To try to get their people, right? Like, language, and trying to, like, in any capacity, teach Ojibwe, right? Like, how can we do it? Where can we sneak it in? What can we, like, there's flashcards on the walls in the classrooms at the college, right? That, like, here's this word, this word, this word. Like, I'm just going to throw it in. And, like, so, like, language and, powwows every other day, and you know, there's tons of stuff. There's, you know, murals of different stories and traditions and things on the wall, right?
Yeah.
The same kind of like, can you do one thing, right? Even if you only do one thing, what can you do?
Yeah.
And you're 100% right that like that outreach is so important to try to do, like to try to get even one thing. Try to make sure that you're manifesting one thing from your culture.
Yeah.
And I think one thing naturally leads to two things, and two to three, and three to
100%.
four. So it's super interesting because a lot of my advocacy cues I take from all of the like First Nations communities that I've worked with.
Yeah.
Because the successful ones are super successful, right?
Yeah. I think that's really awesome because, look, it's one of those things where somebody actually the other day on social media, they said, you're trying to tell Jews how to be Jews.
Yeah.
And I said, no, I'm telling Jews that it's important for them to be Jews.
Yeah.
Because, I don't get to decide what that means.
Yeah.
Only a Jewish person gets to decide what that means. But I want them to know if there's one thing that they can learn from anything, like from either one of us, I think that it's important for them to be Jewish.
Yeah.
Like however they want to manifest that, that's fine. But I mean, like we were talking earlier, you know, we talk about the hand theory, you know, the language, land, culture, blood, spirituality. And that doesn't mean that you have to have all of them, but it does mean that, you know, to have a fully functioning, healthy identity, you should manifest some aspect of each of those things.
Well, and listen, it's a process, right? Like, my Hebrew is atrocious. It's terrible. My kids are better than me. It's a process. I think if you're expecting that you're going to just go from, like, I'm completely assimilated, you know, I have nothing, to I'm, like, super Jew overnight, that's not reasonable, right? And I don't think any culture you can do that with. And I think it's just important to know that each one of those fingers on the hand is important. And, you know, so you can do half of one, great. Do it.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think that's...
Look, I think that you're a good example. And that's at the end of the day, like I teased you about that the one time when I said, look, like, you know, we talk about the light unto the nations, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people forget that that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be better than everyone. It means you have to be the best you that you can be. And by being the best you, you're showing other people how they can be the best them.
Well, I think that's important too from an advocacy perspective. If I'm going out there and I'm advocating on behalf of the Jewish community, I've got to be as Jewish as I can be.
Yeah. Because
otherwise I have no right saying, I'm speaking on behalf of my people. I don't care about 90% of the culture that my people have, but please listen to me when I say this is important to Jews. Like, come on, right? So a big part of why I started embracing more things was because of that. Because, listen, I'm going out there every day and asking people to take me seriously. Yeah. You know, I'd be like you, I'm a native advocate, but like, I don't care about anything. I don't know the language. I don't know the culture. I don't care about the spirituality. I don't whatever. And, you know, like, people are going to be like, great, so why should I listen to Ryan? Right?
True.
Okay.
We'll have to finish up.
Yeah.
We
okay.
can do another